He could calculate with the stub of a pencil on the back of a greasy napkin from Lafayette, Coney Island. His salary as a senior transit mechanic for the city of Detroit was $61,482 a year before taxes. His 2012 Toyota Camry, with 187,000 miles and a persistent rattle in the passenger door, was worth maybe $3,500 on a good day. The tools in his garage, a collection of Snap-on and Craftsman he'd been building since he was a teenager, were insured for $15,000, and the shared savings account he held with his wife, Sade, contained $28,312.54. It was a life built not on grand gestures, but on the steady rhythm of bolts tightened, engines tuned, and paychecks deposited. It was a life he thought was solid. But on Tuesday at 4:17 p.m., he discovered his math was all wrong. He was standing under the hydraulic lift at the DDOT maintenance facility on East Warren Avenue, his hands stained with black grease, the smell of diesel fumes a familiar perfume. His foreman, a thick-necked man named Dave, walked over holding out Quincy's phone. "It's your wife," Dave said, his voice flat. "She said it's an emergency." A cold spike of fear lanced through Quincy's chest. He wiped his hands on a red rag, leaving dark streaks across the cotton, and took the phone. "Sade, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Her voice was as cool and clear as glass. There was no panic in it, no distress. "I'm fine, Quincy. I just wanted to let you know that a courier will be serving you with papers when you get home. I thought it would be more civilized if you heard it from me first." The roar of the garage, the clang of metal, the hiss of air brakes faded into a dull hum. "Papers? What papers?" There was a pause, and in it, Quincy could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass. She was at home, in their rented apartment on Bagley Street in Mexican Town, drinking something cold while his world tilted on its axis. "Our divorce papers, Quincy? I filed this morning." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. "Divorce? Sade, what are you talking about? We had breakfast this morning. You kissed me goodbye." He could still feel the phantom press of her lips, could still smell her $180 Chanel No. 5 perfume. "Yes, well, things change," she said, her tone dismissive. "Look, I can't talk right now. My attorney, Mr. Fields, will be in touch with yours. Just be home to receive the papers. It's all been filed. It's done." Before he could form another word, another question, the line went dead. Quincy stood there for a full minute, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the silence. He looked at his hands. The grease worked deep into the lines of his palms and under his fingernails. These were the hands that had fixed her car, assembled their IKEA furniture, and held her when she cried. They were the hands of a man who built and maintained things, but he had no idea how to fix this. The life Quincy had believed was a stable, if modest structure was, in fact, a carefully constructed facade. Looking back, the cracks had been there for years, puttied over with his own determined optimism. He and Sade lived in a stylish two-bedroom apartment in Mexican Town, a place she'd picked for its proximity to the trendy bars and restaurants of Corktown. The rent was $1,950 a month, a figure that always made Quincy's stomach clench, but Sade had insisted. "We have to live somewhere that reflects our aspirations, Q," she'd said, unpacking a box of her expensive minimalist decor. "Not just our current situation." Her aspirations were on full display in every room. The living room featured a white leather sofa she'd bought for $3,200, a piece so pristine and unforgiving that Quincy was terrified to sit on it after a shift. He usually ended up on his own worn, brown leather recliner, a $400 hand-me-down from his father that he'd had reupholstered. Sade called it the monstrosity and was always trying to convince him to get rid of it. On the wall hung a piece of abstract art, a canvas of angry black and red slashes She'd paid $1,500 for at a gallery in the Fisher Building. Quincy thought it looked like a crime scene. Their finances were a constant, low-grade source of tension. Quincy's $61,482 salary was the bedrock of their household, the steady, reliable income that paid the rent and the bills. Sade worked part-time as a social media consultant for a boutique marketing firm, a job that seemed to involve a lot of long lunches and brought in an inconsistent commission-based income of maybe $25,000 a year. Yet her spending habits were those of a CEO. Her closet was a monument to her tastes, filled with designer labels he only knew from magazines, a $2,400 Burberry trench coat, a small collection of Louis Vuitton handbags that started at $200 apiece, and shoes, so many shoes, each pair in its own clear plastic box, a library of leather and heels worth more than his car. "It's an investment in my brand," she would say whenever he'd gently question a new purchase, like the $800 pair of Christian Louboutin heels she bought for a friend's wedding. "People have to see success to believe you are successful." He, in contrast, was a man of simple needs. His wardrobe consisted of city-issued work uniforms, a dozen well-worn Carhartt t-shirts that cost $25 each, and 2 pairs of Levi's jeans. His prized possession was a vintage Omega Seamaster watch his father had given him, a piece from the 1960s he'd had restored for $600, but for work, he wore an $89 Timex Expedition, rugged and dependable. Once, at a dinner party with Sadie's friends, a man with a slick haircut and a $15,000 Rolex glanced at Quincy's wrist and smirked. Later that night, Sade had been furious. "It's embarrassing, Q. It looks like you don't even care." "It's a watch, Sade. It tells time," he'd replied, confused. "It works." "That's the problem with you, Quincy," she'd snapped, pulling a $90 jar of anti-aging cream from its box. "Everything is just about if it works. You don't have any appreciation for the finer things. You don't own anything that lasts." The line stung, but he'd let it go, just as he let so many of her barbs go. He loved her. He loved the way her luminous, deep brown skin glowed in the morning light, the way she'd laugh at his dumb jokes, the way she'd curl up against him on the rare nights they just stayed in and watched a movie. He thought her ambition was something to be admired, even if he didn't understand it. He was the steady foundation, and she was the beautiful building being erected on top of it. He believed they were a team. He had no idea she was planning to demolish the foundation and keep the penthouse. The most telling sign, the one he now saw with blinding clarity, was the argument over the plot of land in Eastern Market. It was a small parcel, less than a quarter of an acre on Russell Street, that his father had bought for a pittance in the late 90s. For years, it was just a patch of weeds and broken glass. But his father, a man who had worked the line at Ford for 40 years, saw something else. "They're not making any more land, son," he'd told Quincy, his voice rough with wisdom. "Hold on to this. One day it'll be worth something." His father had died 6 years ago, leaving the plot to Quincy in his will. It was the only thing of significant value he had to leave. As Detroit's Renaissance began to ripple out from downtown, the plot's value had skyrocketed. A developer had recently offered Quincy $85,000 for it. He'd been ecstatic, imagining the money as a down payment on a small house, a place with a yard and a 2-car garage, a place where he could finally get rid of the rattling Camry and get his own monstrosity of a recliner. Sade had a different vision. "We are not selling," she had declared, her eyes gleaming with a light he hadn't recognized. "And we are not building some little suburban box on it. This is Eastern Market, Quincy. We could build a mixed-use building, retail on the bottom, 3 floors of luxury condos on top. We could make millions." "Sade, I'm a mechanic," he'd said, laughing. "What do I know about being a real estate developer?" "That's the point," she'd said, her voice dropping. "You don't know anything." "But I do. I've been networking. I know people, architects, investors. You just have to sign the land over to a joint LLC so we can use it as collateral to get the financing. He had hesitated. Something about the idea of putting his father's one true legacy into a corporate entity he didn't understand felt wrong. I don't know, Sade. It's my dad's. Her face had hardened. It's our future, Quincy. Or it could be. Don't be so small-minded. It's just a piece of dirt right now. Are you going to let your sentimental attachment to some weeds hold us back from a real life? The fight had been brutal, ending with her sleeping in the guest room for 3 days. Eventually, he'd agreed to talk to a lawyer about her LLC idea, a concession he made for the sake of peace. He'd been putting it off, a small act of passive resistance. He now realized that his hesitation had been the final straw for her. He wasn't moving fast enough toward her dream, so she was cutting him loose and planning to take the land with her. The days following Sade's phone call were a blur of hollowed-out hours and escalating cruelty. On Tuesday evening, at 6:52 p.m., a young man in a cheap suit served Quincy with the divorce petition. He sat in his father's recliner, the $400 chair that was his only true comfort, and read the documents under the dim light of a $75 lamp from Target. The legal language was cold and alienating, but the intent was crystal clear. Sade was petitioning for a dissolution of marriage on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. And then he got to the section on asset division. His blood ran cold. She was demanding everything. The petition stated that since she had managed the household finances, the $28,312.50 in their joint savings account should be considered her separate property, a result of her astute financial management. It was a lie so audacious Quincy had to read it 3 times. He was the one who set up the automatic transfers from his paycheck every 2 weeks, the one who meticulously tracked their spending in a worn notebook. She barely knew the password to their online banking portal. But that wasn't the worst of it. The petition went on to claim the vacant lot in Eastern Market as a marital asset. Her lawyer, a man named Arthur Fields, from a prestigious firm in the Renaissance Center, had crafted a narrative that was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that the plot's current $85,000 valuation was a direct result of Sade's vision and business development efforts. It mentioned her networking, her meetings with architects, her creation of a comprehensive development plan. It argued that without her contributions, the land would have remained a worthless piece of dirt. Therefore, she was entitled to it in its entirety as compensation for her intellectual and professional investment in their shared future. He felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't a divorce. It was a corporate takeover. She wasn't just leaving him. She was liquidating him. He was being erased, his contributions, his work, his own father's legacy, all dismissed as insignificant. On Wednesday morning at 9:04 a.m., he called her. He needed to hear her say it. He needed to understand the depths of this betrayal. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice wary. "Quincy, I told you to have your lawyer call mine." "I'm not calling about the lawyer, Sade. I'm calling about us," he said, his voice raw. "I'm looking at these papers. The savings account, the land, my dad's land. How could you do this?" "It's not your dad's land anymore, Quincy. It's an asset," she said, her voice hardening, shedding any pretense of civility. "And I'm the one who made it valuable. You were going to sell it for a measly 85 grand to buy some depressing little house in the suburbs? I'm the one who saw its potential to be worth millions. I created that value. The law recognizes that. You created nothing. It was a piece of paper in a file until a developer made an offer," he yelled, his composure finally cracking. "And that's all you see, isn't it? Just the paper. You have no vision, Quincy. You never have," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're happy to spend your life covered in grease, fixing things that are just going to break again. You're a mechanic. I'm a builder. We were never on the same path. I just figured it out before you did." Then she delivered the killing blow, a line he would never forget. "Let's be honest. You don't own anything that lasts. Your car is falling apart, your clothes are from a work supply catalog, and your only real asset was a gift from your dead father. I'm the one with the future. The court will see that." He hung up, shaking. The casual cruelty of her words was like acid. She had taken his life, his work, his identity, and twisted it into a caricature of failure. He felt a profound, suffocating sense of shame. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just a simple man, a mechanic, destined to be left behind by a world that valued visionaries and builders over maintainers and fixers. The next day, Thursday, brought a new level of humiliation. At 11:28 a.m., a letter arrived via FedEx. It was from her attorney, Mr. Fields. It was a formal offer of settlement. He sat at his cheap $150 dining table and read it. The offer was that if Quincy agreed to sign over the deed to the Eastern Market plot immediately and relinquish any claim to the savings account, Sade would graciously not pursue him for alimony. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It was a victor's terms offered to a defeated enemy. Attached to the letter was a summary of Sade's claimed expenses and projected legal fees. The list was staggering. There was a $10,000 retainer for Mr. Fields, whose billing rate was a breathtaking $200 per hour. There were invoices for an architect she had consulted, totaling $3,500 for a preliminary concept rendering. There was a $2,000 bill from a real estate appraiser. She was building a mountain of debt, confident that his assets would cover it all. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, walking through the rooms of the apartment that no longer felt like his. He saw everything through her eyes now. The worn recliner, the scuffed work boots by the door, the framed photo of him and his dad at a Tigers game. It all looked small. It all looked temporary. He had never felt so powerless in his life. He was a man who could diagnose a faulty transmission by the sound it made, who could rebuild an engine from a box of parts. But this problem, this legal and emotional demolition, was beyond his expertise. He felt utterly and completely lost. He didn't know it yet, but help was already on the way, dispatched by his father from 6 years in the grave. Friday was a gray, miserable day. A steady, cold rain fell over Detroit, turning the sky the color of wet concrete. Quincy hadn't gone to work. He'd called in sick, using the excuse of a stomach bug, unable to face the sympathetic looks of his coworkers. He sat in the growing darkness of the apartment, the silence broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. He hadn't eaten. The divorce papers sat on the dining table, a white stack of paper that felt as heavy as a tombstone. He was marinating in despair, replaying Sade's words over and over in his head. You don't own anything that lasts. At 7:15 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was his best friend, Reggie. "Q, you there, man?" Quincy's voice was a croak. "Yeah, Reg. I'm here. I'm outside." "Buzz me in. You don't have to. I'm already soaked. Buzz me in, man." A minute later, Reggie was standing in his doorway, his long locks dripping water onto the welcome mat. Reggie was a force of nature, a big man with a bigger heart who worked as a firefighter. He and Quincy had been friends since they were 5 years old, an unbreakable bond forged on the playgrounds and street corners of their shared childhood. Reggie took one look at Quincy's face, at the darkened apartment, at the papers on the table, and his expression softened. "Man," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled Quincy into a hug that felt like being wrapped in a warm blanket. Quincy, who hadn't cried yet, felt his eyes burn. Reggie didn't ask questions. He just went into the kitchen, turned on a light, and started making coffee. The simple act of normalcy was more comforting than any words could have been. He came back with 2 mugs, handed one to Quincy, and sat down not on the pristine white sofa, but on the floor next to Quincy's recliner. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the smell of coffee mingling with the scent of rain. Finally, Reggie spoke. "I talked to your pops today." Quincy blinked, confused. "Reg, my dad's been gone for 6 years." "I know," Reggie said softly. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket, a piece he'd owned since the 90s, and pulled out a long, thick envelope. It was made of heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind Quincy hadn't seen in years. It was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the initial J for Jackson, his father's initial. Reggie held it out. "He gave this to me about a month before he passed. He made me swear on our friendship that I would keep it safe and not tell you about it, unless a very specific thing happened." Quincy stared at the envelope, his heart starting to beat a little faster. On the front, in his father's familiar, blocky handwriting, were a few lines of text. "To be given to my son, Quincy Jackson, from his friend, Reggie Carter." And below that, a single, chillingly specific instruction: "Reggie, if his wife ever leaves him, give him this, not before." Quincy's hand trembled as he took the envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. He looked at Reggie, 1,000 questions in his eyes. Reggie just nodded, his expression grim. "He knew, man. Or he suspected. Your dad didn't say much, but he saw everything. He saw how she looked at your stuff. He saw how she talked about money. He pulled me aside after your wedding reception. He said, 'That girl's got hungry eyes. You watch out for my boy.' I thought he was just being an overprotective father. But then he gave me this." Quincy ran his thumb over the wax seal. His father, a man of few words and deep, quiet love, had seen the future. He had anticipated this exact moment of devastation and had prepared for it. It was a message in a bottle, sent across the sea of time and death. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside there were 2 documents. The first was a letter on the same heavy paper, written in his father's hand. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, it means the thing I feared has come to pass. I am sorry. I am so sorry for the pain you must be in. I always hoped you would never have to see this letter. I hoped I was wrong about her. I know you love with your whole heart, Quincy. It's the best part of you. But sometimes a good heart can't see a bad bargain. I saw it. I saw the way she looked right through you to the things she wanted. A man like you who fixes things, believes everything can be fixed. But some things, son, are just broken from the start. I knew I couldn't leave you much in the way of money. The pension was never that big. But I wanted to leave you something that she couldn't touch, something that was yours and yours alone, something that would last." The second document was thick, folded, and official. As Quincy unfolded it, he saw the seal of the city of Detroit and the words "Quitclaim Deed" at the top. He scanned the legal text, his eyes catching on phrases and numbers. The property address, 1250 Iroquois Street, Detroit, Michigan. The legal description, a 12-unit brick apartment building in the heart of the historic Indian Village neighborhood. The grantee, the Jackson Legacy Trust. The date of purchase, June 10, 2014. 11 years before Quincy had even married Sade. Tucked behind the deed was another document. The articles of the Jackson Legacy Trust. It was a simple, revocable trust. The grantor was his father, Robert Jackson. The trustee, upon his death, was a law firm Quincy had never heard of. And the sole beneficiary was Quincy Robert Jackson. But there was a specific, unusual clause. The ownership of the trust's primary asset, the building on Iroquois Street, would only be transferred to the beneficiary, Quincy, upon the legal dissolution of his marriage. Quincy's head swam. He read it again and again. His father, the man who wore a $45 watch and drove a 10-year-old Ford, had secretly bought a 12-unit apartment building. A building worth, Quincy guessed, well over $1 million. He had bought it before Quincy was even engaged and had locked it away in a legal fortress, a posthumous gift triggered by the very betrayal that was currently trying to destroy him. He looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with disbelief. The rain was still beating against the glass, but inside the small, dim apartment, a light had just been switched on. A brilliant, blinding light. Reggie was watching him, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Your dad was a smart man, Q, a very smart man." Quincy let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. He looked at the deed in his hands, then at the divorce papers on the table. He thought of Sade's cruel words, her confident dismissal of him and his life. "You don't own anything that lasts." He held the deed in his hand. It was dated 2014. It was solid, it was real, and it was his. His father had left him a kingdom, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the one moment he would need it most. The weekend was a strange dream, a period of suspended animation between two completely different realities. On one side was the life of Quincy Jackson, the heartbroken mechanic, the man being fleeced in a divorce. On the other was the life of Quincy Jackson, the secret owner of a $1.2 million apartment building. For 48 hours, he had to live as the former while knowing he was the latter. On Saturday morning, Quincy woke up for the first time in days, feeling not despair, but a cold, clear sense of purpose. The rain had stopped, and a weak sun was trying to break through the clouds. He showered, got dressed in a clean Carhartt shirt and his best jeans, and made coffee. He laid his father's documents out on the dining table, next to Sade's divorce petition. It was a tableau of his life, her venomous, grasping claims on one side, his father's quiet, powerful protection on the other. His first call at 9:30 a.m. was to the law firm listed as the trustee on the trust documents, Franklin, Cole, and Associates. A polite paralegal informed him that the partner who had handled his father's account, Mr. Franklin, had retired, but his files were now managed by a Ms. Imani Williams. Quincy made an appointment for that afternoon. Then he did something he needed to do for himself. He got in his rattling 2012 Toyota Camry and drove to Indian Village. He parked his car with its Kelley Blue Book value of $3,500 a block away from 1250 Iroquois Street. The neighborhood was a world away from Mexican Town. Grand historic homes stood on wide lawns, their brick and stone facades speaking of old money and quiet dignity. And there it was. It wasn't a palace, but it was magnificent in its own way. A 3-story, bow-fronted brick walk-up, the kind of solid, dependable building that defined old Detroit. It had 12 large windows facing the street and a beautifully carved stone entryway. A small, discreet sign near the door read, "The Iroquois." It looked well-maintained. The brass on the door was polished, the windows were clean, and the small garden in front was tidy. Quincy stood across the street just watching it for almost an hour. People came and went, a young woman with a yoga mat, an older couple walking their dog, a man carrying groceries. It was a living, breathing community, his community. His father had not just bought him a building, he had bought him a future. At 2 p.m., he was sitting in the sleek, modern offices of Imani Williams in a glass tower on Woodward Avenue. Ms. Williams was a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman in her late 40s, her hair in elegant twists. She wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Quincy's monthly rent. Her hourly rate, she informed him, was $450. For the first time, the number didn't make him flinch. He laid out the documents, the trust, the deed, and the divorce petition. She read them in silence, her expression unreadable. She spent a long time studying the trust his father had created. Finally, she looked up, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice rich with professional admiration, "your father was either the most prescient man in Detroit or the most cynical. I'm not sure which. He was a good man," Quincy said simply. "He was a brilliant man," she corrected. "This trust is a work of art. It's what we call a springing interest trust, but with a highly specific trigger. The asset, the building, remains under the management of the trust, generating income to maintain itself until the triggering event. In this case, the legal filing for the dissolution of your marriage. The moment your wife's attorney filed that petition on Tuesday, the clause was activated. The building and all its assets became yours. Not marital property, not community property. It is a pre-existing, non-marital, inherited asset. It's as protected as Fort Knox." She picked up the divorce petition. "And this," she said, tapping the paper with a manicured finger, "is based on a series of profound falsehoods. Your wife is claiming the Eastern Market plot as a marital asset whose value she created. She is claiming your joint savings as her own, and she is doing so under the assumption that you are a man of modest means. She has committed what we lawyers call a fatal miscalculation." A wave of relief so profound it was almost dizzying washed over Quincy. "So what happens now?" Imani Williams leaned forward, her eyes bright with strategic fire. "What happens now is we let her and her high-priced attorney continue to operate under that miscalculation for the rest of the weekend. On Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, we will file a response to her petition. We will not be aggressive. We will not be emotional. We will simply present the facts. We will attach a copy of the 2014 deed to the Iroquois Street property. We will attach a copy of the trust document, highlighting the inheritance clause. We will provide a current valuation of the building, which, according to our records, is approximately $1.2 million, with a net annual rental income of $144,000 after expenses." She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. "Your wife is suing a man she thinks has a net worth of maybe $100,000, including the disputed land. She is about to find out she sued a man with a net worth of over $1.3 million, and that 95% of that wealth is legally untouchable by her. Her entire case, her entire claim for the land and the savings, is predicated on the idea that she was the financial visionary in the marriage. We are about to present irrefutable evidence that the true financial visionary was your deceased father, acting on your behalf more than a decade ago." "What about the land?" Quincy asked. "The plot in Eastern Market?" "We will argue that since you are clearly not in need of liquidating that asset for your survival, and since it was a direct, premarital inheritance from your father, it should remain your sole and separate property. Her claim that she created its value will look ridiculous, even insulting, in the face of this new information. A judge will not look kindly on a litigant who has so clearly misrepresented the financial realities of the marriage." She gathered the papers into a neat stack. "So, for the rest of the weekend, Mr. Jackson, your job is simple. You do nothing. You say nothing. If she or her lawyer contacts you, you do not respond. You forward everything to me. You are a ghost. On Monday, you will be a quiet storm." Quincy walked out of the glass tower on Woodward Avenue and into the late afternoon sun. He felt taller. The weight that had been crushing him for days had been lifted. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist, following a plan laid out for him by the two people who had his back, his best friend and his father. The weekend became an exercise in strategic restraint, a masterclass in playing dumb while his world was secretly being rebuilt from the foundation up. Quincy's instructions from his new attorney, Imani Williams, were simple and absolute. Do not engage. He was to be a black hole, absorbing whatever Sade and her lawyer threw at him and giving back nothing but silence. Saturday evening, At 8:42 p.m., the first test came. His phone buzzed with a text from Sad. He was sitting in his father's recliner, the television off, the quiet of the apartment a comfortable blanket. He looked at the screen. Sade. Got the settlement offer from Arthur? You should take it, Q. It's the best deal you're going to get. His first instinct was to type a furious response, to tell her about the building, about his father, to mock her spectacular ignorance. But he heard Imani's voice in his head. You are a ghost. He took a deep breath, took a screenshot of the text, and emailed it to Imani with the subject line, FYI. Then he put his phone on silent and picked up a dog-eared copy of a book his dad had loved, A History of the Detroit Tigers. He had to pretend to be the man she thought he was, broken, defeated, and poor. It was the hardest acting job of his life. Every fiber of his being screamed for confrontation, for the satisfaction of wiping the smug smile off her face. But his father's plan, and Imani's strategy, required something more difficult, patience. It was the composure of a master mechanic who knows you don't just smash a broken part with a hammer. You carefully disassemble the machine around it, identify the flaw, and replace it with precision. Sunday was even more difficult. He spent the morning doing what he always did on Sundays, laundry and cleaning. He washed the sheets, scrubbed the bathroom, vacuumed the floors of the $119.50 a month apartment he would soon be leaving. He was erasing his own presence, polishing away the memories. As he cleaned, he took a mental inventory. The $200 white leather sofa would stay. The $1,500 abstract painting could go to a gallery for all he cared. He would take his father's recliner, his tools, his books, and the framed photo of him and his dad. He realized his entire life fit into the back of a pickup truck, and for the first time, that thought didn't bring him shame. It brought him a sense of freedom. At 1:17 p.m., Sade called. He let it go to voicemail. He had forwarded her text to Imani the night before, and Imani had replied with a one-line email at 6:30 a.m. Excellent. She's getting nervous. The voicemail notification popped up a minute later. He listened to it, his face a mask of calm. Quincy, it's me. Her voice was tight, annoyed. I know you're getting my texts. This silent treatment thing is childish. Arthur says your lack of response is just going to make this more expensive for you in the long run. He says if we have to fight you for the land, he's going to have to bill for court time. And you know who pays for that. Just sign the papers. Let's make this clean. He listened to the message twice. He could hear the faint tremor of impatience in her voice. She had expected a quick, easy victory. She had expected him to fold, to beg, to accept her meager terms. His silence was disrupting her narrative. He saved the voicemail and forwarded the audio file to Imani. The reply came back in minutes. The silence is working. Keep it up. See you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. at the courthouse. He spent the rest of the day in a state of calm focus. He went for a long walk along the Detroit Riverwalk, watching the freighters glide silently up the river toward Lake St. Clair. The water was a deep, powerful blue, moving with an unstoppable force. He felt a kinship with it. He was no longer a stagnant pond of despair. He was a river, flowing toward a predetermined destination. He thought about his father. Robert Jackson had worked for 40 years on an assembly line, a job of relentless repetition, but his mind had been anything but repetitive. He had seen the world with a clarity Quincy was only just beginning to appreciate. He had seen the value in a patch of weeds, the flaw in a beautiful woman's character, and the power of a secret held in trust. He had armed his son for a battle Quincy never knew he'd have to fight. That evening he packed a small bag, a change of clothes, his toiletries, his father's book. He placed the heavy, cream-colored envelope with the deed and the trust documents inside his worn leather briefcase, another hand-me-down from his dad. He felt like a soldier preparing his gear for an assault. At 9:03 p.m., one final text came from Sade. This one was different. The mask of civility was gone. Sade, fine, be this way. My lawyer will be filing a motion to compel on Monday. You're making a huge mistake. Don't come crying to me when you end up with nothing. He read the words, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a cold, hard smile, devoid of humor. She had no idea how wrong she was. She had no idea that nothing was the one thing he would never have again. He screenshotted the text and sent it to Imani. Then he turned off his phone, lay down on the sofa. He couldn't bring himself to sleep in their marital bed, and closed his eyes. He had a big day tomorrow. Monday morning broke, crisp and clear. The sky over Detroit was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Quincy was up before the sun at 5:30 a.m. He didn't feel tired. He felt electric, a current of quiet power humming beneath his skin. He put on his one good suit, a simple, charcoal gray Hart Schaffner Marks he'd bought for $700 for his father's funeral. It was the only suit he owned. He knotted his tie with steady hands, a simple, perfect Windsor knot his dad had taught him. He looked at himself in the mirror. He saw the same face, the same deep brown skin, the same close-cropped hair. But the eyes were different. The despair was gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable resolve. This was the composure his father had possessed, a stillness born not of weakness, but of absolute certainty. At 8:30 a.m., he met Imani Williams on the steps of the Coleman A. Young Municipal Center. She was a vision in a cream-colored power suit that cost at least $2,000, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She gave him a small, confident nod. "Mr. Jackson, you're ready?" "I'm ready," he said. His voice was steady. They walked through security and took the elevator to the family court clerk's office. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, the atmosphere heavy with the quiet desperation of 100 different domestic dramas. Imani handled everything. She approached the counter, her voice low and professional, and filed Quincy's official response to Sade's petition. The packet was thick. It contained his answer to her claims, denying almost everything. And attached as exhibits were the documents that would change the entire game. Exhibit A, the quitclaim deed for 1250 Iroquois Street, dated June 10, 2014. Exhibit B, the full articles of the Jackson Legacy Trust. Exhibit C, a sworn affidavit from the trust's accountant detailing its primary asset, the building, and its current market valuation of $1.2 million. Exhibit D, a summary of the building's rental income for the past fiscal year. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, stamped the documents with a heavy, satisfying thud, 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 thud. Each sound was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Sade's case. The filing was time-stamped, 9:02 a.m. "Now what?" Quincy asked as they walked back into the hallway. "Now, the system does its work," Imani said, checking her watch, a slim, elegant tag Heuer that probably cost $3,000. The filing is entered into the court's electronic system. A notification is automatically sent to the opposing counsel. Mr. Arthur Fields is about to have a very, very bad morning. They went to a small cafe across the street. Imani ordered a black coffee, Quincy a tea. He sat there, his hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug, and waited. He felt strangely calm. The strike had been launched. The missile was in the air. He had done his part. Now he just had to watch it land. At 9:47 a.m., Imani's phone, sitting on the table between them, buzzed. It was an email. She glanced at it, and the barest hint of a smile touched her lips. "Mr. Fields has received the notification," she said. "He has opened the documents." Quincy imagined the scene. Arthur Fields, in his office on the 60th floor of the Renaissance Center, billing his client $200 an hour, opening a PDF. He would be expecting a weak defensive response. He would be expecting a plea for a more equitable settlement. He would not be expecting a multi-million-dollar atomic bomb. They waited. The minutes ticked by. 10 minutes, 20. At 10:18 a.m., Imani's phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Fields' prestigious law firm. Imani looked at Quincy, raised an eyebrow, and let it go to voicemail. "Let him sweat," she said. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. She played it on speaker, keeping the volume low. Arthur Fields' voice, previously so full of condescending authority in his letters, was now strained, tight with disbelief. "Imani, Arthur Fields returning your... Well, I see you filed your response. I think there's been some sort of mistake here. Some documents you've attached. They can't be authentic. I need you to call me back immediately to clarify this. This is highly irregular. My client has no knowledge of any of this. Call me." Imani simply took a sip of her coffee. "Phase 1, denial," she murmured. At 10:35 a.m., Quincy's own phone, which he had turned back on, began to ring. The screen lit up with one word: Sade. He looked at Imani. She gave a slight shake of her head. He let it go to voicemail. The subsequent voicemail was a stark contrast to her previous messages. The cool confidence was gone, replaced by a high, frantic edge. "Quincy? What is going on? Arthur just called me? He's yelling? He's talking about a building? Some trust? What did you do? This isn't funny. Call me back right now. You need to call him and tell him this is some kind of mistake. What did you forge? You can't forge something like this. You'll go to jail. Call me." Quincy listened, his face impassive. He felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even satisfaction. It was like watching a documentary about a distant, unfamiliar animal. Imani's phone rang again at 11:02 a.m. It was Arthur Fields. This time, she answered. "Imani Williams." She listened for a full minute, her expression unchanging. Quincy could hear the faint, tinny sound of a man's voice, loud and agitated, coming through the earpiece. Finally, she spoke, her voice as cool and smooth as polished granite. "Arthur, let me be perfectly clear. The documents are authentic, notarized, and have been held in trust by this firm for nearly a decade. Your outrage is not my concern. My concern is your client's fraudulent representation in her initial filing. She omitted a material fact, that her husband was the beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar trust." "Oh, wait," Imani paused. The cruelty of it, exquisite. She didn't omit it. She simply didn't know, because the asset was intentionally and legally shielded from her as per the explicit instructions of my client's deceased father. She listened again, then continued. "No, I don't think we will be entertaining your previous settlement offer. In fact, we will be filing a motion for sanctions against your client for filing a frivolous and fraudulent claim. And we will be demanding that she cover all of my client's legal fees." Another pause. "Yes, you do that. Have a good day, Arthur." She hung up. "What was that?" Quincy asked. That was the sound of a very expensive lawyer realizing his client has lied to him and his entire case has just evaporated, Imani said, placing a $10 bill on the table for their drinks. "He's threatening to contest the validity of the trust. He will fail. Now comes the fun part." As if on cue, Quincy's phone rang again. Sade. He let it go to voicemail. And again, and again. Over the next hour, she left 5 more voicemails, each one a step down the ladder of panic. Voicemail 3, 11:15 a.m. "Quincy, pick up the phone. Arthur is talking about dropping me as a client. He says I lied to him." "I didn't lie. I just didn't know. How could I know? You have to explain this to him. Anger and blame. Voicemail 4, 11:28 a.m. A 12-unit building in Indian Village? That's impossible. Your father, he drove a Ford Taurus. He lived in a bungalow. Where would he get the money for that? This has to be a mistake, a typo. Disbelief and denial. Voicemail 5, 11:45 a.m. Okay. So it's real. That building? It's ours, right? It's marital property. We're married. So it belongs to both of us. We can split it. 50-50, that's fair. Just call Arthur and tell him we've worked it out. Bargaining. Voicemail 6, 12:05 p.m. Why aren't you picking up? Quincy, please. Think about us. Think about everything we planned. The condo development, we can still do it. With this money, we wouldn't even need investors. This could be amazing for us. Pleading and manipulation. Voicemail 7, 12:30 p.m. A long silence, then a choked sob. You did this to me. You let me go on thinking. You let me look like a fool. You knew this whole time and you just let me. How could you be so cruel? The final pathetic collapse into victimhood. Quincy listened to the last message, the accusation of his cruelty, and felt a profound, quiet stillness. He had not been cruel. He had been silent. He had simply allowed her own actions to lead her to this place. He had held up a mirror and she had shattered against her own reflection. He looked at Imani. It's over, isn't it? Yes, she said, rising from her chair. It's over. The consequences cascaded with the brutal efficiency of a corporate bankruptcy. For Said, the world she had so carefully constructed on a foundation of debt and delusion collapsed not in a single explosion, but in a series of swift, merciless demolitions. The first pillar to fall was her legal representation. On Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after the strike, Quincy received a formal notice. Arthur Fields and his firm had filed a motion to withdraw as counsel for Said Jackson, citing a fundamental and irreparable breakdown of the attorney-client relationship due to the client's material misrepresentations. In layman's terms, he fired her. He also attached a final bill for his services, including the frantic, non-billable hours he'd spent trying to comprehend the trust documents. The total was a staggering $17,450. Since she could no longer pay him with the promise of Quincy's assets, the bill was now her sole responsibility. The second consequence was financial. With Imani Williams now on the offensive, the narrative in court flipped entirely. The divorce was no longer about a wealthy, visionary woman being held back by a working-class husband. It was about a man of significant inherited wealth protecting his premarital assets from a grasping, deceptive spouse. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, took one look at the timeline, the 2014 trust, the 2025 marriage, and her expression hardened. The Eastern Market plot, the one Said had claimed to have infused with value, was declared Quincy's sole and separate property in a summary judgment. The judge's written opinion was withering, noting that the petitioner's claims of creating value through vision and networking do not constitute a legal basis for the appropriation of a premarital inherited asset. The $85,000 piece of his father's legacy was secure. The joint savings account, the 28,312.54s that Sad had claimed as her own, was meticulously audited. Imani's paralegal, a terrifyingly efficient young man, produced bank statements and pay stubs proving that over 90% of the funds had originated from Quincy's direct deposits. The judge ordered the account frozen and then divided it according to its demonstrable origins. Said was awarded $2,612. Quincy received $25,754. The third consequence was social and professional. The architect and appraiser Said had hired on credit, sending their invoices to Arthur Fields, were now sending them directly to her. Word travels fast in the small, incestuous world of Detroit development and design. The story was just too good. The ambitious social climber who tried to fleece her mechanic husband, only to discover he was secretly a real estate magnate. Her reputation as a visionary and builder was incinerated overnight. She was no longer seen as an ambitious player. She was seen as a cautionary tale, a fraud. Her boutique consulting work, which relied on networking and reputation, dried up completely. The final, most humiliating consequence was the divorce settlement itself. Unable to afford a lawyer of Arthur Fields' caliber, Sade was forced to hire a cut-rate attorney from a strip mall office. The new lawyer, facing Imani Williams' mountain of evidence, could do little more than negotiate the terms of a complete surrender. The final divorce decree was signed 2 months later. Sade received no alimony. She received no property. She was not awarded a single dollar of Quincy's trust or its assets. In fact, the judge took the extraordinary step of ordering her to pay Quincy's legal fees, which totaled $22,500, citing her bad faith filing. Sade, who had started the process believing she would walk away with a 6-figure land deal and the entire savings, left the marriage with her $2,612, a mountain of debt that included $17,450 to her first lawyer and $22,500 to her ex-husbands, and a tarnished reputation. She had to sell her $2,400 Burberry coat and 2 of her Louis Vuitton bags on a consignment website just to make rent on a small studio apartment in a less fashionable suburb. The white BMW 3 Series she leased for $580 a month was voluntarily repossessed. Quincy, meanwhile, never had to speak to her again. He handled everything through Imani. He did, however, hear from Reggie about one final, desperate phone call she had made to him. She had apparently begged Reggie to talk to Quincy, to ask him for mercy, to appeal to his good heart. Reggie's response, as he later recounted to Quincy over a beer, was simple. "Sade, you made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. You should have known better than to underestimate a Jackson man. They build things to last." 1 year later, the late afternoon sun of a perfect Michigan autumn streamed through the large, newly installed windows of the apartment. The light illuminated the swirling dust motes, dancing in the golden air. The smell was of fresh paint, sawdust, and new beginnings. Quincy stood in the middle of what had been Unit 3B at 1250 Iroquois Street, but was now something more. The past year had been one of profound, quiet transformation. After the divorce was finalized, Quincy had moved out of the Mexican Town apartment and into one of the vacant units in his building. He'd given his 2 weeks' notice at the Didiot garage, a bittersweet farewell to a life he had once loved but had now outgrown. His old foreman, Dave, had clapped him on the shoulder, a rare smile on his face. "Go on, get out of here, you damn landlord," he'd said, but his eyes were proud. Quincy hadn't hired a big, expensive contracting firm to renovate the building. Instead, he did what he knew best. He assembled a team and got his hands dirty. He hired a couple of retired tradesmen he knew from the Transit Authority, a plumber and an electrician. And together, they started the slow, methodical work of bringing the grand old building back to its full glory. He learned about plaster and permits, about zoning laws and tenant rights. He was still a mechanic, he realized, just on a much larger scale. The building was his new engine, and he was tuning it with care. He kept 10 of the 12 units rented to their existing tenants, even lowering the rent for 2 of the older residents who were on fixed incomes. The 11th unit was his own, a simple, clean space, furnished with his father's recliner, his books, and a new, solid oak dining table he'd built himself. The 12th unit, this one, Unit 3B, was his passion project. It was nearly finished. The floors were a beautiful, refinished hardwood. The kitchen had brand new, no-frills but high-quality appliances, a $100 GE refrigerator, a $900 Whirlpool stove. The bathroom was spotless, with gleaming white subway tile, But the real magic was in the details only a working person would appreciate. There were extra outlets near the entryway for charging work phones and tool batteries. The closets had heavy-duty shelving. The kitchen sink was deep, big enough to wash a grimy set of hands without splashing water everywhere. This unit was not for rent on the open market. Quincy had made an arrangement with the Transit Workers Union. This would be a subsidized temporary residence for transit line workers who were new to the city or facing a personal hardship. A safe, dignified place to land. It was a way of honoring the world he came from, the world that had built him. Reggie walked in, carrying a six-pack of beer, his locks now tied back in a neat bun. He looked around the pristine apartment and whistled. "Damn, Q, you did good." "We did good," Quincy corrected, taking a beer. They stood by the window, looking out over the tree-lined street. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. "Heard anything about her?" Reggie asked quietly. Quincy shook his head. "No, and I don't want to. I hope she finds peace. I hope she learns something. But her story isn't my story anymore." He had instructed Imani to use the $22,500 Sade owed him to anonymously pay off her debt to her first lawyer, Arthur Fields. It was a final, silent act of cutting ties, of ensuring there were no loose ends that could ever connect them again. It was an act of forgiveness, not for her, but for himself. On the freshly painted wall, in the place of honor above a small bookshelf, hung a single framed object. It wasn't a $1,500 piece of abstract art. It was his father's letter, the heavy cream-colored paper now protected behind glass. Quincy read a line from it almost every day. "I wanted to leave you something that she couldn't touch. Something that was yours and yours alone. Something that would last." It's strange how life works. For years, Quincy Jackson measured his worth in hourly wages and the Kelley Blue Book value of his car. He thought his life was about maintenance, about keeping things running until they inevitably broke down. He was wrong. His father had taught him, from beyond the grave, the most important lesson of all. True wealth isn't about what you own, but what you can build. It's not about the things you acquire, but the legacy you leave behind. And the most valuable things in life, love, loyalty, and a father's foresight, don't have a price tag. They are the things that truly last. What do you think is the most important lesson Quincy learned? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your stories of resilience and justice. And for more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength, be sure to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride.